Hello everyone and welcome again to Tim's Tutorials. I'm Tim and this is the second tutorial in the Semicolons series, and today we are going to be focusing on common punctuation and sentence structure errors, things which I very commonly see in my students' writing. And of course we're going to look at possible solutions to those, more than one, and you can judge for yourselves which one is best. Okay, so we've got three kinds of very common errors here: the comma splice, fuse sentence, and incorrect use of semicolons. So let's deal with comma splices first, because they're the ones which I see the most often. And a comma splice is when you have two or more main clauses in a sentence separated only by a comma. And the problem is that the comma is not strong enough to just separate two main clauses. Okay, so let's look at the first example. I am not bitter about Jack's promotion. I am not overjoyed about it either. So here we have two independent clauses because they could be separate sentences, but they're only joined by a comma, which isn't enough. So we need to either add a conjunction, in this case but, or make two separate sentences, or add a semicolon, which in my opinion is the best solution because it keeps the one sentence and it is grammatically correct, and it also hints at the link between the sentences. If you remember from last time, I explained that a semicolon joins together two independent clauses which are linked in meaning. So in this case, the link is a contrast, like saying on the other hand. So you could say however or on the other hand after the semicolon, but it's not necessary. Next example, Jack parked in my space again. I let the air out of his tires. So same problem again. So similarly, we need to add a word after the comma, a conjunction, so in this case, because it's cause and effect, or again, make two separate sentences, or best of all, add the semicolon. And as in the previous example, this is grammatically perfect and it hints at the connection, which is cause and effect. If you wanted to, you could say therefore after the semicolon, or as a result, but again, it's not necessary because it's implied. Third example now, this is taken from one of my students' writings. So this is a real life example and a very typical example of a comma splice. There is an irregular rhyme scheme. This could show that the mother is really upset, but she may also be happy that her daughter is all grown up. Okay, so the student is writing about a poem called To a Daughter Grown Up by Linda Pastan. I think that's the title of it. So can you see where the incorrect comma splice is? Of course you can. It's after scheme, because again, there is an irregular rhyme scheme. That could be a separate sentence, and the part afterwards, this could show, could be a separate sentence. And you can see what the student's trying to do. He's trying to explain his point, which is a good point about the irregular rhyme scheme. He's trying to do so in one sentence, and it's not enough to have a comma. So what could you do? You could add the conjunction and after the comma, or you could keep the comma and add which. And this is a very underused word, but it works very, very well here. It helps the sentence to flow. And in this case, the second part of the sentence is now dependent. It couldn't be a sentence on its own, because you couldn't start a sentence with which could show. But that's fine because it's attached to an independent clause, which is the first part. Okay, you can make two separate sentences, which is not great because it doesn't flow, but it still is better than a comma splice. And finally, best of all, the semicolon. This links the two parts of the sentence. The first part is shorter, but that's fine. The sentence doesn't have to be balanced on either side of the semicolon equally. So this shows that there is a link. The student is explaining his point, and what I've also done is add a comma at that point after upset, because you have the word but, and that could easily come after a comma. And incidentally, that's another reason why the first solution, which was to, if I go back to it, adding and after the comma is not great, because you have this other conjunction right beneath it, the but. So it's just, it doesn't flow very well. It's too many conjunctions. So the semicolon with the comma after upset flows really well. All right, let's move on to fused sentences. These are even worse than comma splices because you have absolutely nothing separating two main clauses, and this is just not possible grammatically. So you need punctuation or you need conjunctions. Let's look at one example. Driving home from school, Brett vowed to protect the fragile ecosystem all the while the tyres of his car flattened the toads hopping on the wet streets. Obviously, that doesn't sound right if you read it aloud, as it should be read with no pause whatsoever after ecosystem and before all. So you need something to separate the parts here, because all the while could be the start of a new sentence. So you should either put a full stop and start a new sentence, or you could use a comma and say yet, which is like saying but, or use a semicolon, and that sorts out the issue completely. If you wanted to, you could add the word however, but it's again not necessary because it's implied. That's the beauty of a semicolon. It engages the reader and it gets them to think about the irony in this case between what Brett was vowing to do in his mind and what he was actually doing in his car. Finally, less common is the incorrect use of semicolons. So people tend not to use semicolons at all, but occasionally when they do use them, they use them incorrectly. So just to reinforce, semicolons must separate two main or independent clauses, and semicolons are not just fancy commas that make longer, more dramatic pauses. They're a lot more than that. First example, I had a great weekend, doing my laundry, weeding the garden, and unblocking the sink. So, as you can see, there shouldn't be a semicolon here because the second part of the sentence is not independent. So, what you would need to do is make it independent. You need to, in this case, repeat the subject and make each of the verbs in the past tense. And then you have a possible sentence there. That could be a separate sentence, and it comes after a semicolon, so that's fine. Next example. Next weekend I plan to steam clean the bathroom, which is one of my favorite activities. So if you read that out loud, there would be quite a long pause after the semicolon, so that wouldn't make sense. There wouldn't be a long pause. So what there should be instead, and of course the second part of the sentence again is not independent. You couldn't have a sentence starting with which is one of my favorite activities. So you would need to just use a comma. Or if you wanted to use a semicolon, you would have to make that second part, or in this case, if you make two sentences, you'd have to make the first part, you'd have to, in this case, repeat the idea of steam cleaning the bathroom is one of my favorite activities. So that phrase, steam cleaning the bathroom, is now the subject. It's a noun phrase. Or just use the semicolon, and that has the same effect as previously having two sentences. You don't need anything to help the sentence along after the semicolon. Okay, next, it's my birthday next weekend though, so I might have to go out and celebrate. Okay, so the word so cannot follow a semicolon because it's just an ordinary conjunction. It has to come after a comma, so that's what you would use. Or if you wanted to make two separate sentences here, you could do that. Or use the semicolon. So basically, that's almost identical to the first example, the first incorrect example. All we've done is taken away the so. So now that second part could be independent. So just go back and show you that. Yeah, so there it is. Semicolon so. So the only thing you're doing is taking away the so. All right. Fourth example. I like to spend weekends doing chores, and I can't stand to waste time socializing. Okay, exactly the same as the previous examples. Ordinary conjunction after a semicolon isn't possible, so make it into a comma, and that's fine. Make it into two sentences, or just use the semicolon. Okay, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this useful. Okay, these are especially the comma splice, very common mistakes. So well worth avoiding if you want to pick up maximum SPAG points, spelling, punctuation, and grammar, worth between 5 and 12%. So you really want to get as many of those as possible, and using semicolons correctly is one very big step in the right direction. Thanks again for watching. If you have time, please visit my Facebook page, Tim's Online Proofreading, and watch out for my next video in the series. Bye for now.